Question is that the bill be now read a second time. Mr. Zhulkarnain Abdul Rahim.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise in support of these amendment bills. Sir, I will be focusing my speech on two areas: maintaining vigilance by keeping up to date with new psychoactive substances, NPS, taking a tougher stance for large amounts of drugs in possession, and to protect vulnerable groups. NPS have become a global phenomenon with reports in 139 countries, according to the UN ODC. As at December 2022, more than 1,182 substances have been reported. NPS are just as addictive and mimic the effects of controlled substances such as cannabis, cocaine, and heroin. NPS is proliferating at an unprecedented rate and poses a challenge for law enforcement worldwide. According to the UNODC Commission on Narcotic Drugs, the largest number of NPS are spread across three regions: Asia, Europe, and North America. In Singapore, there has been an increase in the number of NPS abusers arrested, from an average of 3 per year in the 2014 to 2017 period to 235 per year in the 2018 to 2022 period. NPS is one of the three most abused types of drugs since 2018, and NPS overtook cannabis in 2019 as the second most commonly abused type of drugs among new abusers. Listing NPS as controlled drugs is a challenge in all jurisdictions because we need to keep up with the fast pace of development of NPS. In order for the substances to be listed in the first schedule of the Misuse of Drugs Act, the relevant scientific analysis on the chemical structure and necessary industry consultations have to be done to determine whether or not there is a legitimate use for such substances. And if there is no such legitimate use, the NPS will be listed. This means that during the interim period, when the NPS is unlisted, enforcement and prosecutorial actions cannot be taken against those who deal in those substances. Moreover, the lag time allows NPS manufacturers time to develop alternative substances or deliberately alter the chemical structures to circumvent our drug control legislation. We thus need legislation flexible enough to adapt to NPS in a timely manner. Hence, I welcome the proposed framework which will regulate such substances based on the capacity to produce a psychoactive effect rather than its chemical structure. I do have two clarifications. One, on the defense for legitimate use. Second, the other on the presumptions of possession and knowledge of NPS. The bill provides a defense if the psychoactive substance is intended to be used for a legitimate purpose other than for human consumption. Under the new sections 11F to 11P, the person must have the intention or reasons to believe such a legitimate purpose in various scenarios, including where an accused believed that the other party had intended to manufacture the psychoactive substance for a legitimate purpose. May I ask, what are the plans of the Ministry and CNB, working in concert with other agencies, to regulate the use or manufacture of psychoactive substances for research, teaching, or other legitimate use, with reference to accepted standards and expectations? For instance, a person who breaches such regulations or falls short of certain standards should not be allowed to avail himself of this defense of legitimate purpose. Next, on presumptions. A person who has control or custody of anything containing psychoactive substances or keys to a place where such psychoactive substances are found under the new section 18A will be presumed to have had those psychoactive substances in his or her possession. This then triggers separate presumptions of knowledge in the new section 18A subsection 2, read with the new sections 2022B. namely two separate presumptions. Firstly, that person is presumed to have known that the substance has the capacity to have a psychoactive effect on an individual if consumed. And secondly, the person is presumed as not believing nor having any reason to believe that the psychoactive substance is an excluded substance. These are two separate presumptions of knowledge based on an initial presumption of possession. Hence, may I ask, what are the safeguards in place to protect innocent landlords or organizations running shelters from being prosecuted under these presumptions of these sections? What due diligence is one expected to do and conduct in such circumstance? Sir, in Malay please. Bahan psikoaktif baru telah berleluasa di merata dunia dan ia meniru kesan dadah seperti ganja, candu dan heroin. NPS menimbulkan cabaran baru untuk kita. Disebabkan struktur kimianya yang boleh ditukar, pengesanan dadah NPS menjadi semakin rumit. Di Singapura, bilangan pengguna dadah NPS kian meningkat. Rangka perundangan ini mengemaskinikan senarai NPS dan cara mengesan NPS pada masa depan. Selain daripada NPS, dadah-dadah lain seperti ganja dan methamfetamin berbahaya dan mengancam keamanan dan keselamatan masyarakat kita. 15 gram diamorfin sahaja sudah mencukupi untuk memenuhi ketagihan 180 orang selama seminggu. Bayangkan berapa ramai keluarga dan anak-anak yang akan terjejas dalam satu kes sahaja. Kita mesti sentiasa berwaspada dan bertekad dalam membasmi gejala dadah dalam masyarakat kita. Sir, I welcome this bill's proposed increased punishments, including caning for the possession of selected controlled drugs above certain weight thresholds. This toughens our stance against drug abuse and makes clear the already tough sentencing guidelines laid down by our courts since the case of Lai Teck Guan by Chief Justice Menon. The sentencing must be commensurate to the harm that the large quantities of drugs that they pose. Some may argue that weight of a drug alone isn't an accurate factor to determine the level of harm, and one should refer to the potency of addiction instead. However, until and unless there is a reliable technology to determine such potency accurately and independently, weight remains a useful barometer. This tough stance against drugs is needed to protect the vulnerable groups in our society. Recently, last month, it was reported that CNB arrested a 32-year-old woman for drug offences. She was with her 2-month-old infant. In June last year, a 9-month-old baby was found with his drug abuser mother in dire living conditions. CNB officers provided childcare necessities and milk powder for the baby. These are sad and tragic cases, and I'm glad that Singapore adopts a strong stance to protect our vulnerable groups and hopefully prevent such cases in future. The new Section 11N sends such a signal. It makes it an offence for exposing a child to any psychoactive substance or paraphernalia. I agree with this. Sir, another major concern is the softening attitudes among the young towards drugs, in particular cannabis, including the prevalence of drug abuse depiction in popular culture. According to CNB, 26% of all drug abusers arrested were below 30 years old. Out of all the new abusers arrested, half of them were aged below 30. The number of youth abusers below 20 years old caught abusing cannabis has also increased threefold since 2021. This bill makes it a specific offence for anyone causing or procuring a young person to commit any offence relating to psychoactive substances under the new Section 11Q. This is the correct move to make. In addition, we need to be wary of the prevalence of vaping culture trend worldwide. While nicotine is commonly consumed through vaping, e-cigarettes can also be used as a way to deliver other controlled drugs, such as methamphetamine and heroin. In fact, Vaping has become a common way of inhaling cannabis. In Canada, 29% of cannabis-using individuals aged 15 years and older indicated that vaping is their preferred method for cannabis use. There is a strong link and risk between vaping use and drug abuse. Although it is already illegal here, we need to step up on enforcement and education on the harms of vaping. Vaping instruments also come in various shapes and forms. Some are even small and discreet, making it difficult to detect. Hence, can Minister of State please share the strategy and actions that MHA will be taking in concert with HSA or other agencies against vaping? Sir, in closing, I would like to share a story about a young professional I knew who unfortunately fell into drugs after a bout of personal difficulties and mental health issues. He was introduced to drugs by people who knew of his precarious emotional state and took advantage of him to lure him into addiction. Once hooked, he had to pay through his nose, sometimes 4 or 5 times higher than the drug's street value, in order to avoid being detected or recognized. He has since served his time and rehabilitated himself. He now volunteers in the anti-drug abuse advocacy A3 network with NACADA and CNB. As a young and successful professional, he may not fit the mold of a stereotypical drug abuser. His story shows that our fight against drug abuse must be made on behalf of every segment of our society, our youth, our children, our workers. And we face battlefronts everywhere, our schools, our workplace, our homes. Drug traffickers drive addiction to feed their greed for profits at the expense of families and communities. They will continue to introduce new drugs and new ways to circumvent our laws and influence our people. But just as they are relentless in their ways, we must similarly be tireless in our vigilance to protect the minds and safety of our people, steward the future and potential of our youths. In this fight against drugs, we cannot let them win. Sir, I support the bills.